Hello, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another CSGO News episode. I hope you guys all enjoy. I feel like I haven't been to an episode in a long time. I don't know why. It's been kind of a longer weekend, so I hope you guys all enjoy. As always, all of today's stories will be timestamped down below. As of course, Faceit Major Challenger stage has now completed itself. We now have, of course, this upcoming weekend, the Legendary stage to begin, and I cannot wait. The Major so far has been amazing. We're going to talk about as well some technical issues, but on top of that, some big stories coming out of this Major. As of course, many of you guys can expect after a couple weeks when the Major does conclude, some big team changes will come in, and as of right now, those changes are kind of preluding to what could be the future of maybe a Virtus Pro roster. So first off, we actually have Byali saying his official goodbyes, and many of you guys have already heard it on this channel as well as other outlets out there. The future of Virtus Pro seems to be very, very dim. Back in 2016, signing those 4-year contracts, the longest at that point in time, the longest and biggest contract in CSGO history, and now 2 years later, guys, not even 2 years later, we actually have half the roster leaving. That's going to be Taz, Snacks, and now Byali. Over half that roster that signed those long contracts will be gone, and the big question now is, of course, if you guys did see Pasha and his tweets afterwards, this honestly, at any team out there, any player out there, the people that you care about the most and probably making the most emotional, it was really hard to see Pasha tweet out stuff like that. Of course, you guys know his common lines, my brother, my friend, a Virtus Pro, which we'll talk about in the very back half of today's episode. The results at the Major itself looking very defeated. They didn't really play anyone too close besides maybe a small comeback against North on their final map. I believe on maybe Mirage is what it was. Besides that, though, just looking very defeated in their gameplay and did not look good whatsoever. So it really makes you question, will this be the last Major for Pasha Biceps? Obviously, Virtus Pro would have to qualify back to the European Minor next Major, and when you really consider where they're at as a team, they're going to lose Byali. They're going to have to pick up another, probably a lower tier Polish player, a younger player who could, of course, be better than Byali. But again, you look at the chemistry and, of course, the timeline these guys are going to have if they do change multiple spots on top of just Byali, having to requalify to the European Minor. They only just barely held on to their Mountain Dew League spot. You really got to wonder where these guys are and if they can actually manage to make it back to the Katowice Major, next Major in early 2019. And that was probably the most defeating story we've had today so far. Byali has said his official goodbyes. Will there be more Virtus Pro changes, though? Leave a comment down below what you guys think, because I think it's almost inevitable. I think it's going to happen. And also announced this morning, apparently to a Russian inside source, I'll try and link the article down below where you guys can translate it as well. Apparently, due to inside sources out there, we obviously knew Gambit had issues going into the Major, and we're going to need some kind of results. Previously a Major winner themselves, not the last Major, but a Major winner nonetheless. With a similar roster here, we expected something out of them, but a team who had not really shown too much. And allegedly as well, according to this Russian insider, it will be Gambit Gaming to actually release their entire CSGO roster. They're going to pick up a new roster. Again, pretty much not concluded right now, but on top of that, we actually had, thanks to my friend TGC, he sent me this before the Major. It was actually Mo who made a Facebook post. He had actually changed to lurking or the roaming role. That's what he means by the CSGO free. He wasn't trying to play for free. He was, again, lack of translation here, guys. It was actually Mo announcing for the team for Gambit he would go to the lurker role. So kind of I guess you could say, questioning their roles inside the team itself. And again, he also said he will leave the team soon. So this kind of very, very definitely aligns with it. So thanks to TGC, all of you guys who send me that kind of stuff. It does make a lot of sense. Mo before the Major did confirm he will be leaving Gambit Gaming. Now we have inside sources after Gambit. Disappointing run, to say the least, guys. Again, kind of like a Virtus Pro. A very close match, opening match in overtime against Tyloo was just about all we saw out of them. Their only win against Renegades. Renegades, probably one of the worst performances we saw during this Major. And again, I don't mean to diss any fans out there. It was all best of one, so it was very hard to judge this gameplay in too much of depth. But again, Gambit, one of those teams who looked very disappointing. So Mo said he was going to leave before the Major. He said he was going to leave very, very soon before the Major. So that does make a lot of sense to Gambit actually, of course, releasing that roster. And then you do have to question as well, where are these guys going to go? It's pretty obvious people like Mir and I guess people like Adren have definite spots in the CIS scene. Will they stay with the roster and re-sign 3 different players? Who are these other guys going to be signed by? Will Flipside Tactics comes back? Again, there's going to be one of many changes coming out there, guys, but it does seem very likely Gambit Gaming will disband as well. But also some non-major stuff out there. We actually have Robiin. If you guys remember, Robiin, if you guys probably don't remember as well, he actually received this email from Valve just a couple days ago, and he has actually now been Un-Vac banned. This is actually an unprecedented history. I'm very surprised, though. I'm really curious what you guys think about this. Robiin was actually banned a long time ago for his playing of another game. He was actually VAC banned in a different Steam game, and that VAC ban, of course, carries over on your Steam profile, and he was therefore given a VAC ban inside CSGO back in 2013. Now, 5 years later, almost 5 years later, it's been Valve who decided to email him and say, hey, by the way, we've looked into your case. We know it took 1,500 plus days, but you are now Un-Vac, man. You can now continue your career with your team known as Endpoint. He's been playing with this team for quite some time. They can now go to Valve official events. I don't think, they're a top tier team out there that's been knocking on the door of many Valve events, but still, it definitely has held him back in many regards. There's also been many accusations. I remember there was a qualifier. I'm not really sure if it was for WESG, but he was with the team for a qualifier, and it broke out on Reddit that this team was playing with former VAC-banned players, and Robiin was one of them. So as you guys can imagine, this really did, of course, over the past 5 years, it definitely cost him a lot of reputation, a lot of time, and again, maybe some money as well, but it's actually Valve 5 years later Un-Vac banning Robiin. Congratulations to the guy. He seemed very happy on Twitter, but I myself personally thinking, I would think he'd be a lot more angry about this, but will this mean different changes for other VAC-banned players out there? Most likely not. Very lastly, and I guess non-major news out there, we actually have OpTic Gaming announcing their third roster. Now, this is actually one of the very, very few teams, if not the only team currently in CSGO now operating 3 full CSGO rosters, and I talked about this on our esports talk channel. If you guys want to check that out, I talk about CSGO on there as well. That'll be linked down below, but I thought it just blew my mind. Now, OpTic Gaming, when they first announced, of course, they're all a North American roster. A couple of years ago, 2 to 3 years ago, they were fully a North American organization, and then now, of course, they've gone to actually a full European roster for their starting roster. Obviously not doing too well at the major, but still a loaded roster there. Then they announced their full Indian roster, and everyone was like, okay, interesting to go to a weird scene like that, a growing CSGO scene, but they now had those 2 rosters, and now a third roster, guys, an all-female Brazilian CSGO roster. Now, I think this probably has the most potential of any of their rosters. When you think about a scene out there that's easier to penetrate, it probably would be the female scene, and we look at a talented scene out there, it's probably the Brazilian scene that you want to sign to actually do so. So now they have a full European male roster, a full Indian male roster, and a full female Brazilian roster. That's 3 full CSGO teams for OpTic Gaming. I appreciate what they're doing. I'm not sure they're going to make any of their money back from doing it, but it's very cool to see OpTic Gaming, the only organization currently with 3 such diversified CSGO rosters. And so very lastly for CSGO news, of course, the Faceit Major Breakdown, guys, the Challenger Series is done. It's concluded, and we now have our 8 teams going through. So, of course, I'll show you guys, and spoilers, spoilers, just so you guys know, if you guys have not watched the matches for today, here they are now, the 8 teams going through, the 8 teams, of course, not going through. I'm going to give you guys a quick TLDR of the little bit breakdown. I'm not going to keep it too long for you guys. I'm going to give you guys my worst teams, in my own opinion, and again, a lot of these matches were best of 1, so you can't base too much off it, but on a big stage like this, you really expect your more well-established teams out there, especially teams who competed recently and did very well recently, to do better than they did for sure. So one of those teams, I guess I'm going to give you guys my worst teams. I'm going to say my worst best teams. Those are the teams that I think, we weren't expecting too much out of them, but they put up a good fight, and I'll show you guys my best teams as well. So I think, most notably, I think we can all agree that Virtus.pro is definitely the number 1 on the list for a team that when you watch them play their matches, and of course going 0-3, a team that just looked really defeated in their gameplay, and I really could not put it any other way, and I almost cannot blame them. They're a team that did not look very good at all this last year and a half, so we didn't expect much. They haven't looked good. I mean, there's just nothing they've done that has, of any notable standpoint, and especially with Byali leaving the team, you expected this. So they are one of my worst performances, but they're not the worst. I think that probably goes to Renegades, and that being because in the last month or so, they looked like a team who had maybe going to break that little Asian minor curse, the kind of stigma over there that a team like that who has no Asian players can compete in the Asian minor. That's always been a weird thing. And of course, coming to second to Tyloo like usual, we still expect them to do quite well. They didn't look as solid. I really, hard way to word it around, their gameplay was just not looking very solid. Their losses to Tyloo, not a huge surprise because, of course, in the Asian minor, Tyloo is probably most notably better than Renegades, historically speaking as well, and Tyloo not looking too bad. They actually made it through in kind of a surprise fashion. Tyloo will be at the major this year, so kind of cool story for them. They also lost Renegades, that being. They also lost to Gambit, though. Gambit, a team who is definitely broken, and probably another one of those teams out there I would put on this list for worst performances so far, but I don't think they're going to be on my top 2. So Virtus.pro, Renegades, disappointing in my opinion, but again, a lot of best of 1s out there for these teams, and so there's not too much to judge, but teams that it was almost sad to watch those guys play. On top of that, though, I wanted to mention very briefly our best worst teams, the first of which goes to Space Soldiers. Unfortunately enough, guys, a team who struggled to play with Hardstyles, their coach, in place of Engine, and I completely understand that. They lost their day 1 match to Rogue. They only played Inferno the entire way through. Their day 1 match to Rogue was actually close, I believe 16-10, but it wasn't that close. Day 2 they played Complexity, and I think it was actually 16-12, so pretty close there. It was amazing to see as well. They also almost take a match off Renegades, also on Inferno, and that was even closer than all the other ones. So I do also want to say, though, of course, with their coach being in place, I feel bad for the team, but they did play in my opinion, 3 of the worst teams here in their best of ones, that being Rogue, that being Complexity, and Renegades. But they played them very well. They played Inferno quite solidly for a guy like Hardstyle who could not break 8 kills on a map, and I'm not blaming the guy whatsoever. They are one of my worst, best performers, and I mean that in a good way. On top of that, though, very lastly is Rogue. Rogue also did not go through. They go to their best of 3 matchup, guys. Unfortunately enough, a team that I think really threw themselves out of this major. And you guys know I love Rogue themselves. I love Hiko. I love Cadian. But honestly, a team that I think really deserved to go through. They lost their last match to North, I believe it was. Forgive me if I do forget a few of these things, but it was actually overtime losses to Astralis and North. So their first matchup, guys, it's really tough to see as well. They come away with a win over Space Soldiers, and then the next day they lose an overtime match as well to Astralis, and they lose another overtime match to North, and that North match, I believe, was double overtime, and both on Inferno as well. And if you guys have seen the major issues so far, huge technical issues with the sound of footsteps, and I really do personally think if this was actually a thing, we've heard no comment from Rogue. I don't believe any of their Twitters, though. On both those matches they lost in overtime. One sec. Sorry, sometimes my AC turns on in the middle of the videos. In both those overtime matches against Astralis and North, they had several match points, several chances to actually beat those teams, and there were several times as well where North was actually pushing smokes or Astralis was pushing smokes, and they would jump push. They would make obvious sounds, and you'd see Rogue players not even turn. And so there were big major issues. Apparently the server that was actually sent for this major is having issues with hearing enemy footsteps, and I do personally think that Rogue could easily have been 2-1, and obviously had 3 chances instead of only 1 chance to actually make it through to the major itself. I think one of the best, worst teams we saw this major, guys, put up some very good fights against very solid teams, and they really should be in our top 16. So also very lastly, I think, I'm not going to lie to you guys, NIP looked very solid, and as well as Liquid. I think the 3-0 teams this time around definitely earned their spots there, but Astralis, of course, looking very solid. I think I'll give my best team so far, performance-wise, to Liquid, just the way they dominated the team so far, and especially dominated teams like Liquid. They did not play the best teams out there, but they looked very solid. I do want to say, very lastly, most notably, is we have a Team Vega Squadron going through, a team that I put as 0-3, but if you guys watched the major, you know that was not a bad pick. Their first 2 matches were insanely close, barely came away against Team Spirit and some other matchups as well, and they just, as of me recording this, beat North in a best of 3. They actually 2-0 swept them in quite dominating fashion. The second map a bit closer than the first, but still, I want to give my applause to Vega Squadron. They are a huge surprise, and I want to give my D-applause to North. Probably the biggest surprise so far, coming off a DreamHack Masters win over there at Stockholm, and you expected a lot more out of North. So North go home, and Vega Squadron do go on, guys, and that's our Faceit major so far. One more time on screen, the 8 teams that will be going through. It's exciting to see, and I cannot wait how they play against these legendary teams, because not only are we going to see a lot of roster changes out there, guys, I do believe that a lot of these teams in these group stages, these challenger stages, are better than a lot of the teams in legendary stage, and we could have a challenger victory here, guys, this time around. So hope you guys all enjoyed. I will see you in a couple days, some more CSGO news. If you guys did, feel free to leave a comment down below. As always, my name is Jake, and I like you, and I'll see you all then. Goodbye.